Сәлем достар, бұл Қазақ Story Time, біз бастаймыз.
The powerful directors who had dictated Vance Global's policies for over a decade shuffled out with hunched shoulders, clutching their leather folios as if they were lifeboats. They had entered the room secure in their unassailable privilege. They left it knowing their empires were built on sand. Only 3 people remained in the cavernous, glass-walled space: Julian, Victoria, and Marcus. Outside, the storm clouds had broken, unleashing a torrential downpour that whipped against the skyscrapers, washing away the smog and grime of the city below in streaks of gray water. Marcus closed his leather briefcase with a satisfying heavy snap. "Well," Marcus said, a rare, genuine smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, "that went swimmingly. Beatrice Sterling is currently hyperventilating in the women's executive restroom, and Arthur Pendleton's driver just texted me asking if we need him to clear out his office tonight or if tomorrow morning will suffice." Julian walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the rain-lashed skyline. His reflection stared back at him, no longer the lonely hunted survivor who had clawed his way to the top out of sheer spite, but a man made whole. He turned around, resting his hip against the glass sill. "Let them pack tonight," Julian said, his voice hard. "I don't want a single trace of their administrative rot left in this building by dawn. Marcus, initiate the secondary phase of the audit. I want every subsidiary, every shell company, and every hidden asset tied to Arthur and Beatrice's faction frozen immediately. If they tried to siphon even $1 of corporate capital into private offshore accounts, I want it tracked down and seized." "Already on it, Julian," Marcus nodded, picking up his briefcase. "I'll coordinate with our forensic accounting team downstairs. Oh, and Victoria? Welcome aboard. It's safe to say your first day on the job has broken every corporate record in New York history." Victoria gave a small, appreciative nod. "Thank you, Marcus. And don't worry about the uniform. I think the coffee stain adds character." Marcus laughed, a deep, rumbling sound, before turning and striding out of the boardroom, leaving the siblings alone in the quiet expanse. Julian walked over to the obsidian table where Victoria still sat, her hands resting flat against the polished black stone. He pulled out the chair directly beside hers and sat down, leaning in close. "You handled them like a veteran, Tory," Julian murmured, genuine awe in his voice. "I've spent 10 years trying to corner Arthur Pendleton legally, and you dismantled his entire defensive perimeter in under 5 minutes using a mention of a Delaware shell company. People like Arthur think power is about how loud you can yell or how many zeros are in your bank account," Victoria replied softly, her hazel eyes reflecting the gray light of the storm. "They forget that power is actually about information. When you grow up in the shelter system, Julian, you learn to watch people. You learn to read the micro-expressions, the subtle tells, the quiet panic of adults who are trying to hide things from children. Arthur and Beatrice thought I was invisible. They spoke freely around me because, in their minds, a maid isn't even human enough to register as a threat. They weaponized your invisibility," Julian said, his jaw tightening as anger flared anew in his chest. "And it destroyed them." "Exactly," Victoria said, a cold, sharp edge entering her tone. "Invisibility is a terrible weapon when you're the victim. But in a boardroom, it's the ultimate camouflage. And speaking of camouflage, we still have one loose end to tie up." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Elena." "Elena," Victoria confirmed, standing up from her chair and brushing off her stained skirt. "She thinks she can just pack a suitcase and slink away to some 5-star hotel in the Hamptons while she licks her wounds. But she made a critical error, Julian." "Oh, she left her personal vault keys in the master suite's dressing room," Victoria said, a brilliant, dangerous grin lighting up her face. "And as the co-managing director and primary co-trustee of the Vance estate, I happen to know that a significant portion of the jewelry and high-end liquid assets she accumulated over the last 5 years were purchased using corporate expense accounts under the guise of public relations and client acquisition." Julian let out a low whistle, a grin slowly spreading across his face. "Corporate tax fraud on top of domestic assault. Elena really did excel at exceeding expectations." "Let's go pay her a visit," Victoria said, buttoning up her ruined service jacket. "I want to make sure my final act as a household manager is a thorough one." Upstairs in the penthouse, The atmosphere was a stark contrast to the boardroom's sterile triumph. It looked like a cyclone had touched down. Drawers were yanked open and left hanging sideways. Designer shoe boxes were scattered haphazardly across the pristine white marble, and silk evening gowns trailed across the floor like discarded petals. Elena was standing in the center of her massive walk-in closet, frantically dumping the contents of a velvet-lined jewelry tray into a battered leather duffel bag. Her hair was a bird's nest, her makeup was entirely ruined, and she was sobbing hysterically as she tried to force a diamond-encrusted tennis bracelet into a side pocket with trembling fingers. The private elevator chime echoed through the penthouse. Elena froze, her breath catching in her throat. She dropped the bracelet, spinning around toward the bedroom entrance just as the heavy oak door clicked open. Julian and Victoria walked into the master suite side by side. They moved with an identical, terrifying synchronization. Two apex predators who had cornered their prey. Elena shrank back against a wall of floor-to-ceiling shoe racks, her eyes wide, darting desperately toward the private balcony as if she might actually consider leaping off the 70th floor. "Why you?" Elena shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Victoria. "Get out of here. This is my private suite. You have no right to be up here." "Julian, are you out of your mind? Let her corner me in my own home." Julian didn't answer right away. He walked leisurely to the edge of the plush king-sized bed, slid his hands into his trouser pockets, and looked around the trashed room with feigned disappointment. My, Elena," Julian clicked his tongue, his tone dripping with sarcastic pity. "Is this how a lady of high society packs? Such dreadful disorganization. I expected better from someone who lectures the staff on cleanliness." "Shut up. Just shut up," Elena screamed, tears of sheer fury streaming down her face. "You both conspired against me. You brought this trash into our home and turned my life upside down. But I'm not leaving empty-handed. These jewels, these bags, they were gifts. Gifts given during our marriage. They're mine." Victoria stepped forward, closing the distance between them until she was standing just a few feet away from the trembling woman. She didn't look angry. She looked completely, chillingly serene. "Actually, Elena, they aren't," Victoria said smoothly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tablet, tapping the screen once before holding it up for Elena to see. On the screen was an itemized forensic accounting ledger. According to Marcus's preliminary asset review, Victoria continued, her voice crystal clear, every single piece of jewelry in that duffel bag, including the 10-carat yellow diamond ring you claimed was an anniversary present, was purchased using corporate credit card ending in 4092, registered under Vance Global's Public Relations Discretionary Fund. Legally speaking, that makes them corporate property. Embezzlement of corporate assets, to be precise. Elena's face drained of every last drop of color. She stared at the tablet screen as if it were a venomous snake. That's impossible. Those are personal gifts. Everyone does that. Everyone doesn't get caught by a forensic auditor who hates inefficiency. Victoria countered mildly. She reached out with two fingers, caught the strap of Elena's leather duffel bag, and effortlessly pulled it out of the frantic woman's grip. "Hey, give that back." Elena lunged forward, trying to snatch the bag, but Julian's hand shot out, grabbing her upper arm with a grip like a hydraulic press. He didn't squeeze hard enough to bruise, but he held her completely immobile. "Aha," Julian warned softly, his dark eyes boring into hers. "Touching company property is a federal offense, Elena. Don't add grand larceny to your resume today." Victoria unzipped the duffel bag, casually tipping it over onto the plush bedroom carpet. A glittering cascade of diamond necklaces, gold watches, and designer gemstone brooches spilled across the floor, clinking softly against one another. She bent down, picked up a heavy platinum Rolex encrusted with baguette-cut diamonds, and slipped it into her own pocket. "Thank you for packing everything so neatly, Elena," Victoria said with a sweet, lethal smile. "It saved our logistics team a lot of time." Elena let out a raw, broken sound, half scream, half sob, and slumped down the side of the shoe rack, hitting the floor in a heap of crumpled designer clothes. Her power, her wealth, her status, her stolen jewels, it was all gone. Stripped away in less than 24 hours by the very girl she had doused in scalding coffee. Julian looked down at his sobbing, ruined soon-to-be ex-wife with absolute, unadulterated coldness. Pack whatever clothes you actually bought with your own pre-marriage savings, Elena, Julian said flatly. You have 20 minutes. If you're still in this building when the clock hits 6, security will physically toss you out onto the wet pavement. And trust me, they won't use the front entrance. He turned away, offering his arm to his sister. Victoria slipped her hand through the crook of Julian's elbow, a sense of profound, hard-won peace washing over her soul. The girl from the shelter, the orphan with the indigo birthmark, had finally come home. And the castle was entirely theirs. Part 7. The ashes of the old world and the blueprint for the new. The 20-minute countdown ticked away with the merciless precision of a digital clock. Down in the subterranean service bay of the Onyx Tower, the heavy steel loading dock doors rolled upward, letting in the damp, petrol-scented chill of a rainy Manhattan evening. A single black sedan sat idling by the industrial dumpsters. In the back seat, curled into a tight, shivering ball of self-pity and ruined cashmere, sat Elena Vance. She had not been allowed to use the private elevators or the grand marble lobby. Stripped of her biometric access codes, her credit cards, and her illusions of grandeur, she had been escorted down through the freight service elevator by 2 burly estate security guards, men who didn't offer a single word of sympathy as they unceremoniously dumped her single, legally permitted suitcase of pre-marriage clothing onto the wet concrete of the loading bay. The transition from the pinnacle of high society to the back alley of an industrial service entrance was absolute. As the heavy metal door of the loading dock slammed shut behind her, sealing her out of the empire forever, Elena let out a broken, hysterical sob that was instantly swallowed by the roar of the city traffic. Up on the 70th floor, however, the air was crisp, clean, and electric with new beginnings. Julian and Victoria stood side by side at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master suite, watching the tiny, insignificant black speck of the sedan pull away from the tower and merge into the chaotic, rain-slicked stream of avenue traffic. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the smoke has cleared and the victors are left to survey the horizon. She's gone, Victoria said softly, her reflection ghosting over the glittering expanse of the city lights below. She's gone, Julian echoed, wrapping a warm, solid arm around his sister's shoulders, pulling her close. And she's never coming back. Her legal team already tried to file an emergency injunction to freeze the asset transfers, but Marcus intercepted it before it even hit a judge's desk. Between the corporate embezzlement paper trail and the security footage of the assault, she's completely cornered. If she so much as opens her mouth to the tabloids, our defamation lawyers will bury her so deep she won't see daylight until 2050. Victoria leaned her head against Julian's chest, listening to the steady, reassuring thud of his heartbeat. For the first time in her 22 years of life, the hollow, phantom ache in her chest, the one left behind by a fire in a Chicago tenement and a cold metal crib in a Queens shelter, felt completely, permanently filled. It's strange, Victoria murmured, closing her eyes. For so long I thought people like her, people who live in these towers, who wear these clothes, who treat others like dirt, were a different species. I thought they were untouchable gods. But looking down at her now, realizing how fast it all unraveled, I see how fragile they really are. They build their entire lives out of glass. One good stone, and the whole thing shatters. That's because they build things out of vanity, Julian replied, his voice firm and grounding. Vanity doesn't have a foundation. It's just an inflated balloon waiting for a pin. But you and I? We were forged in concrete and ash, Tori. Nothing can break us because we've already survived the worst the world could throw at us. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing against the jagged, indigo birthmark on her collarbone. The living proof of their shared blood, their shared history, and their unbreakable bond. Which reminds me, Julian said, his tone shifting from philosophical reflection to executive command. Now that the dead weight has been cleared out, we have an actual empire to run. The board is in total disarray, Beatrice Sterling is facing federal indictment, Arthur Pendleton has resigned and fled to Zurich, and Vance Global's public relations department is currently headless. Victoria pulled back slightly, a sharp, brilliant light flashing in her hazel eyes. The quiet, observant household manager was completely gone, replaced by the newly minted co-managing director of a multi-billion-dollar global enterprise. A headless public relations department is a dangerous vulnerability, Victoria noted immediately, her mind already racing through administrative strategies. We can't let the media narrative spin out of control regarding the sudden restructuring of the executive board. If the market panics, our stock value could take a temporary hit before the fiscal reports drop. Julian smiled with genuine admiration. My thoughts exactly. So what's your opening move, co-director Vance? We don't hide the restructuring, we weaponize it, Victoria said, walking away from the window and pacing across the plush white carpet with effortless grace. We call an emergency press conference for tomorrow morning at 9 sharp. Right here in the executive auditorium. A press conference? Julian raised an eyebrow, intrigued. To announce what? To announce the launch of the Vance Foundation for Displaced Youth, Victoria stated clearly, her voice ringing with absolute conviction. We take half of the liquidated assets recovered from Arthur Pendleton and Beatrice Sterling's frozen slush funds, roughly $40 million, and we funnel it directly into overhauling the state foster care and shelter pipeline in the tri-state area, starting with St. Jude's in Queens. Julian stared at her, completely floored. The sheer genius and poetic justice of the strategy hit him with the force of a tidal wave. You're going to take the corrupt money stolen by the board members who look down on orphans and use it to save thousands of kids like we used to be, Julian whispered, a slow, proud grin spreading across his face. And you're going to announce it live on national television from our own corporate headquarters. Exactly, Victoria nodded. It completely hijacks the news cycle. Instead of the tabloids speculating about messy divorces or corporate infamy, the headlines will read, Vance Global purges corrupt executives and launches record-breaking philanthropic initiative for foster youth. It transforms a corporate scandal into an inspirational masterclass in governance. Wall Street will love it. The public will applaud it, and any competitor who tries to smear us will look like a heartless monster. Julian walked up to her, caught her hands in his, and kissed her knuckles with profound reverence. Dad and Mom would be weeping right now, Tori, he said softly. You didn't just survive the cage. You took it apart, melted down the bars, and built a bridge for everyone else still trapped inside. We built it together, Julian, she corrected gently. The heavy mahogany doors of the master suite suddenly swung open, interrupting the moment. Marcus stood in the doorway, holding a fresh stack of encrypted digital tablets and a steaming cup of black coffee. He took one look at their expressions and immediately stopped in his tracks. I see the post-mortem analysis is going well, Marcus dryly observed, walking into the room and handing Julian a tablet. Though I should warn you, Julian, your calendar for tomorrow morning is about to explode. Every major news outlet from Bloomberg to CNN has been blowing up my phone for the last 20 minutes demanding to know why half the board of directors resigned simultaneously at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday. Tell them to tune into our broadcast at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, Julian replied, taking the tablet and scrolling through the preliminary operational drafts Victoria had just outlined. And Marcus? Clear my entire afternoon. My sister and I have a very important appointment in Queens. Marcus blinked, a rare look of confusion crossing his stoic face. Queens? May I ask why? Victoria smiled, a warm, radiant expression that chased away every lingering shadow of the past. We're going shopping, Marcus, Victoria said lightly. Only this time we're not buying designer sweaters or diamond tennis bracelets. We're buying a brand new future. Part 8. Returning to the ashes and the redemption of St. Jude's. The autumn air over Queens was sharp, biting with the distinct scent of decaying leaves and industrial exhaust. A stark contrast to the sterile, climate-controlled luxury of the Onyx Tower penthouse. A sleek black Maybach purred to a halt at the rusted iron gates of the St. Jude's Youth Shelter. The contrast between the multi-million-dollar vehicle and the decaying chipped brick facade of the institution was so jarring that it felt almost surreal. The chain-link fence sagged in places, the courtyard grass was overgrown and littered with plastic wrappers, and the peeling turquoise paint on the front doors looked like old scabs refusing to heal. Inside the car, Victoria stared out the tinted window. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a strange hollow echo of the little girl who had clutched a frayed, colorless blanket to her chest 20 years ago inside those very walls. Tori. Julian's voice was a soft, grounding anchor beside her. He reached across the center console and gently covered her hand with his own, We don't have to go inside if you're not ready. Marcus can handle the acquisition paperwork with the city council remotely. We can buy the land, bulldoze the block, and rebuild from the ground up without ever stepping foot through those doors. Victoria slowly turned her head, looking from her brother's concerned dark eyes down to their intertwined fingers. She took a deep, steadying breath, letting the familiar chill of the Queen's air fill her lungs. "No, Julian," she whispered, a fierce, resolute glint sparking in her hazel eyes. "If we're going to burn down the old world and build something real, I need to walk through the exact place where I learned how to survive. I need to see it not as a victim but as a Vance." Julian's expression softened into a profound, fierce pride. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, popped the lock on the car door, and stepped out into the cold air, immediately walking around to open hers. As the heavy iron gates creaked open, the squeak echoed across the desolate courtyard. A middle-aged woman wearing an oversized fleece jacket over a faded sweatshirt stepped out of the shelter's main entrance, holding a clipboard against her chest like a shield. Her name tag read Director Brenda Higgins. She looked exhausted, the kind of profound institutional exhaustion that came from decades of trying to feed 40 kids on a budget meant for 10, fighting a losing battle against state bureaucracy, underfunding, and sheer neglect. "Can I help you?" Brenda called out, her voice wary, shielding her eyes from the afternoon sun as she looked past the expensive car to the two immaculately dressed figures approaching her. "If you're from the city tax office, I already filed the extension forms." "Hello, Brenda," Victoria interrupted softly, stopping a few feet away. Brenda froze. She squinted, peering closely at the young woman standing before her in the tailored charcoal coat and fine cashmere scarf. The sharp, intelligent line of the jaw, the striking hazel eyes, they triggered a faint, distant archive in the back of the director's overworked brain. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Brenda asked, her brow furrowing. "I meet a lot of kids come through here, but..." "Victoria Vance. Victoria se played quietly. Though 20 years ago, I didn't have a last name. I slept in cot number 4 in the West Wing, right under the leaky radiator that used to sound like a freight train every time the winter heat kicked on." Brenda's clipboard slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the concrete pavement. Her hands flew up to cover her mouth, her eyes widening in absolute, disbelieving shock. "Tori," Brenda breathed, her voice cracking into a raw whisper. "Little Tori? My God. I heard whispers that you were placed through an emergency private adoption when you were 3, but the files were instantly locked by a high-tier state mandate. We never knew where you ended up. And look at you. You look like a movie star." "I'm not a movie star, Brenda," Victoria said, a gentle, melancholic smile touching her lips as she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around the older woman in a warm, unhesitating embrace. "I'm just a sister who finally found her way home." Brenda hugged her back fiercely, tears instantly springing to her eyes. When they pulled apart, Brenda looked over Victoria's shoulder and caught sight of Julian standing tall and silent behind her. Even in casual attire, Julian radiated the unmistakable aura of an apex predator. "And this is my brother," Victoria said proudly, gesturing toward Julian. "Julian Vance." Brenda's breath hitched again. Even out here in the forgotten industrial sprawl of Queens, the name Vance Global was legendary, synonymous with tech monopolies, billionaire venture capital, and untouchable corporate power. "Vance as in Vance Global?" Brenda stammered, looking between the two siblings in utter bewilderment. "You two are." "We're family," Julian said simply, stepping forward and extending a hand. Brenda shook it mechanically, still paralyzed by the sheer absurdity of the alignment. "And we're here to make a donation, Brenda." "A donation?" Brenda let out a breathless, dry laugh, gesturing wildly to the peeling paint and sagging chain-link fence around them. "Mr. Vance, whatever corporate tax write-off or PR stunt your foundation is running this quarter, I appreciate it, but a couple of $1,000s isn't going to fix this place. The roof is rotting, the foundation is sinking, and the state is threatening to condemn the building by the end of November. We need millions. Millions we'll never ever see." Julian exchanged a swift, knowing look with his sister. "Good thing we aren't talking about a couple of $1,000s then," Julian said smoothly, pulling a sleek leather portfolio from his coat pocket and handing it directly to the stunned director. Brenda opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside sat a binding legal trust agreement, fully authorized and notarized by the New York State Surrogates Court, alongside a certified banking ledger confirming an initial, unconditional wire transfer of $50 million. Brenda's eyes darted across the numbers, reading the zeros over and over again as if expecting them to vanish like a cruel mirage. $50 million? Brenda whispered, her legs suddenly giving out slightly. She grabbed onto the edge of a nearby metal railing to steady herself. This isn't real. This has to be a mistake. What's the catch? What do you want in return? Do you want to tear the shelter down and build a luxury high-rise condominium? Victoria stepped closer, placing her hand gently over the paperwork clutched in Brenda's shaking fists. We want you to tear it down, yes, Victoria said clearly, her voice ringing with absolute power and unconditional love. Not for a condominium, but to build a state-of-the-art residential academy and resource center. Private bedrooms with real heating, modern classrooms, fully equipped computer labs, a dedicated legal and psychological counseling wing, and a guaranteed college or vocational scholarship fund for every single child who walks through these doors. Brenda stared at Victoria, hot tears streaming freely down her weathered cheeks. The exhaustion, the years of fighting an unwinnable war against poverty and institutional abandonment, finally dissolved into an overwhelming wave of grace. Why? Brenda choked out, her voice barely audible over the distant rumble of the city traffic. After everything you went through here, why come back to save us? Because nobody saved us when we were sitting in those beds, Julian answered, his voice dropping into a register of quiet, unyielding steel. So we had to grow up, build an empire from the ground up, and become the saviors we desperately needed when we were 3 and 9 years old. Victoria looked back at the decaying building one last time, seeing past the peeling paint and broken windows to the brilliant, shining future they were about to construct from its ashes. The golden cage of the Onyx Tower had been impressive, but true power, real unbreakable soul-deep power, wasn't found in keeping people out. It was found in opening the doors wide enough for everyone else to climb out with you. Come on, Julian, Victoria said, turning away from the shelter with a radiant, unshakable smile. Let's go home. We have a press conference to run tomorrow. Part 9. The Global Broadcast and the Fall of the Old Guard. The next morning, the executive auditorium on the ground floor of the Onyx Tower resembled a media war zone. Hundreds of journalists, camera operators, and financial analysts packed shoulder to shoulder, their equipment humming with restless energy. Dozens of boom mics crisscrossed the air, and flashing camera strobes illuminated the massive LED screen behind the obsidian stage, which displayed a crisp, minimalist logo. The Vance Foundation for Displaced Youth. The internet was in absolute pandemonium. For the last 14 hours, rumors had been swirling like a Category 5 hurricane across social media and financial news networks. Wall Street was panicking over the sudden, inexplicable resignation of half the Vance Global Board of Directors. Tabloids were frantically trying to piece together why Elena Vance had been spotted by paparazzi checking out of a luxury hotel in the Hamptons with a single suitcase, looking like a ghost of her former self. And industry insiders were desperate to know what structural changes the elusive tech titan Julian Vance was about to unveil. At exactly 8:58 a.m., a low murmur rolled through the auditorium as the side doors swung open. Julian Vance walked out first. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, his expression a mask of absolute, unyielding calm. But it was the woman walking beside him that made every camera lens in the room snap forward in unison. Victoria Vance walked with the poise of someone born to command rooms twice that size. She wore a tailored cream-colored blazer over a simple black silk shell. There were no flashy designer logos, no ostentatious diamond necklaces, just the quiet, devastating elegance of a woman who knew she owned the board, the building, and the narrative. And right there, stark and unapologetic against the pale skin of her collarbone, the jagged indigo birthmark caught the glare of the studio lights, immortalized by 100 lenses in a single fraction of a second. They stepped up to the elevated obsidian podium. Julian gestured for his sister to take the microphone first. The low hum of chatter in the auditorium died instantly, replaced by a tense, breathless silence that stretched across the globe through millions of livestream screens. Good morning, Victoria began, her voice steady, crystal clear, and carrying an effortless, magnetic authority. For the past decade, Vance Global has been known as an institutional monolith, a machine driven by code, capital, and algorithms designed to consume the future. But today, we are rewriting the core code of our enterprise. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the front row of financial journalists. Yesterday afternoon, our executive board initiated a comprehensive structural and ethical audit, Victoria continued, her hazel eyes scanning the sea of cameras. As a result of these findings, several high-ranking directors, including Arthur Pendleton and Beatrice Sterling, have permanently resigned from Vance Global amidst federal investigations into corporate asset misappropriation, discretionary fraud, and gross breaches of fiduciary duty. Their systemic rot has been excised from our foundation. Flashes went off like lightning storms, blindingly rapid. Reporters began furiously typing on their laptops, sending breaking news alerts across the globe. Furthermore, Victoria said, her tone shifting from a corporate announcement to something deeply, fiercely personal. Effective immediately, the Vance Family Trust is committing $50 million in liquidated slush fund assets, recovered directly from those very same corrupt channels, to establish the Vance Foundation for Displaced Youth. We are completely rebuilding the residential, educational, and legal support infrastructure of institutions like St. Jude's Shelter in Queens, transforming them from holding cells of neglect into academies of opportunity. She paused, letting the staggering weight of her words sink into the collective consciousness of the media empire. I know this because 20 years ago, I slept in cot number 4 of that exact shelter, Victoria declared, her voice ringing out with unshakable power, her hand lightly touching the indigo mark on her collarbone. I know what it means to be invisible. I know what it means to be discarded by a system that values profit margins over human lives. And to every corporate elitist, every abusive manager, and every person who ever looked down on a child because they wore a uniform or lacked a last name, hear this clearly. The old world of inherited privilege and cruelty is dead. The foundation has woken up, and we are tearing down your glass towers from the inside out. She stepped back from the microphone, leaving the auditorium in a state of stunned, paralyzed silence for 3 full seconds before the room erupted into a deafening roar of applause, shouted questions, and frantic camera shutters. Julian stepped up to the mic, placing a hand on his sister's shoulder, offering a rare, genuine, triumphant smile to the cameras. The press conference is concluded, Julian announced calmly over the chaos of the crowd. Written statements will be distributed at the lobby exit. Have a productive day. As they turned and walked off the stage through the secure side exit, the doors swinging shut behind them, they left behind a radically altered world. Upstairs in the penthouse, far above the flashing lights and the roaring city, the penthouse was quiet, peaceful, and entirely their own. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest, converted into concrete, bricks, and a future for thousands of children who would never have to walk in the dark alone. Victoria poured herself a cup of fresh, hot coffee, brewed just the way she liked it, and walked out onto the massive glass balcony, looking down at the glittering expanse of Manhattan. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she didn't flinch. She belonged right here, at the very top of the world, exactly where she had always meant to be. Part 10. The horizon beyond the glass, epilogue. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the New York sky in bruised shades of violet, amber, and deep indigo. High above the bustling arteries of Manhattan, the 71st floor of the Onyx Tower, once a sterile, highly guarded zone of corporate isolation, was now filled with the sound of genuine life. The heavy, intimidating obsidian tables had been pushed back, replaced by warm oak work desks, soft lighting, and sprawling architectural models of the new Vance Foundation academies slated to break ground across the tri-state area. Julian stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the executive suite, a crystal tumbler of scotch resting loosely in his hand. He wasn't looking at the financial tickers scrolling on his digital risk display, or reviewing quarterly risk assessments. Instead, his dark eyes were fixed on the reflection of his sister across the room. Victoria sat at her desk, her hair tied back in its familiar practical knot, poring over structural blueprints for the newly acquired St. Jude's campus. She wore a soft charcoal sweater, comfort taking precedence over designer labels, and the faded indigo birthmark on her collarbone caught the dying amber rays of the sunset, glowing like a quiet badge of honor. The transformation of their lives over the past week had been nothing short of seismic. Elena Vance was now a footnote in legal briefs and a fleeting headline in morning gossip columns, her legal challenges summarily crushed by Marcus and his relentless team of attorneys before they could even reach a courtroom. The corrupt board members were facing federal indictments, their hidden offshore accounts systematically unraveled and funneled directly into the philanthropic trust. Vance Global was no longer just an algorithmic tech titan. It was a beacon of systemic reform, its stock value skyrocketing as investors rushed to align themselves with the most powerful corporate restructuring in modern history. "You're working too late, Tori," Julian called out gently, breaking the quiet hum of the room as he walked over and placed a steaming mug of herbal tea beside her blueprints. Victoria looked up, blinking away her intense focus, and offered a soft, tired smile. She stretched her arms over her head, letting out a long, contented breath. "I'm not working, Julian. I'm building," she corrected lightly, taking a sip of the tea. "Brenda called from Queens an hour ago. The demolition permits were approved by the city council ahead of schedule. The old building comes down on Monday morning." Julian leaned back against the edge of her desk, crossing his arms over his chest. "Good. Let the dust settle. We'll build something stronger, taller, and entirely unshakable right where the ruins used to be." Victoria set her mug down, her hazel eyes locking onto her brother's. "Do you ever look back at how we got here? At the apartment, the shelter, the years of feeling completely invisible, and wonder what would have happened if that coffee had never spilled?" Julian let out a quiet, reflective chuckle, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "If that coffee hadn't spilled, Elena would still be treating this penthouse like a gilded cage. I'd still be drowning myself in corporate spreadsheets to numb the ghost of a sister I thought was gone forever, and you'd still be hiding your brilliance behind a spray bottle and a feather duster." He reached out, his warm fingers lightly brushing the edge of her collarbone, right over the jagged constellation of her birthmark. "The universe has a funny way of correcting its mistakes, Tori," Julian murmured softly. "It takes a single violent, chaotic moment to shatter the illusion, and suddenly you see the truth of who you are. You weren't a maid in that kitchen. You were the rightful heir to this entire world, just waiting for the foundation to finally wake up." Victoria leaned into his touch, a profound sense of peace washing over her soul. The phantom ache of the orphan girl in the cold metal crib was gone, replaced by the unshakable certainty of a legacy built on blood, resilience, and absolute justice. "And the best part?" Victoria whispered with a brilliant, fierce smile that mirrored his own. "What's that?" Julian asked, raising an eyebrow. "We're never going to let anyone make us invisible ever again." Outside, the city lights flickered to life one by one, piercing the gathering dark of the Manhattan night. A million tiny stars burning together, illuminating a horizon that stretched out infinitely before them, completely unshakable, completely free.